Greetings and welcome to our next episode of Ghost Stories of Washington. Chapter 1 being continued with Haunted Houses, the Cats in the Cottage, and the Presents. Let's see what our two stories bring us today. The Cats in the Cottage. I began the research for this book by scattering requests for contributions all over the state. The following story took a convoluted route to reach me, and I'm extremely glad it arrived because this is a truly fascinating tale about a modern-day haunting. Just a few years ago, a young couple we'll call Tim and Louise moved into what Louise described as a studio cottage apartment in Seattle's South Side. She went on to explain that the rental property was located in a nice little complex of cottages. On the ground level, with flowers and grass, she looked forward to enhancing the appearance of their new home by planting a flower garden in the front yard. The pair settled in happily and was delighted when they discovered that they had been adopted by a stray cat in the neighborhood. It loved to come inside the apartment. Louise remembered the cat had its favorite spot to lay in, as if it had been there before. Neither Tim nor Louise objected to having a part-time pet. As a matter of fact, they quite enjoyed having the animal in their lives. About the same time they were being adopted by the critter, however, they both began to hear faint but disturbing noises. It sounded like a woman moaning, Louise said. At first, the couple were terribly concerned by the slightly eerie sound. We thought maybe it was just the neighbors, Louise recalled. Unfortunately for their peace of mind, the neighbors soon moved away. Worse, the moans did not merely continue, they actually became more intense. According to Louise, the experience was kind of creepy, but the ideal that the apartment might be haunted was at the same time exciting. We didn't tell anyone about the moaning because we wanted to be sure it wasn't just the pipes or some other mundane cause. We wanted to be sure that it was something more. It wasn't long before we got our proof. Initially, that proof was subtle. On several occasions, both Tim and Louise were sure that pieces of their furniture had moved slightly, even though neither of them had touched anything. Soon, the entity became bolder. There were a few times when I actually saw chairs move, Louise recalled. Despite this visual evidence, the practical couple wanted more proof that what they believed they were seeing and sensing was not a product of their own imaginations. They set about constructing a homespun experiment. We would draw crayon circles around the legs of the chairs in the kitchen to make sure that we weren't just seeing things, Louise said. A few minutes later, we'd check the chairs and find that they had moved right out of the circle. Now, they were certain that there was a manifestation of some sort in their home. One day, Tim was home by himself with the cat. It had gotten into a fight with another cat and had its foot badly injured. Tim was on the couch holding the cat, trying to get a look at the animal's injured foot. The cat obviously didn't feel like being held at the moment and was trying to wriggle his foot away, meowing loudly in the process, Louise explained. Then the moaning started. From the back of the apartment, a woman's voice started wailing, "No," very loudly, she recalled. Whatever was back there had picked up a large beach towel from the bathroom and thrown it into the kitchen, and had knocked other items around in the bathroom. Needless to say, Tim let the cat go. As soon as he did, the eerie moaning stopped. Tim and Louise deduced that their feline visitor belonged to whomever had lived in the suite before they moved in. We had been getting mail for someone named Alice for quite some time, so we figured she was our ghost. A couple of months later, I was talking to a neighbor and asked her about who had lived in our place before we did. She said that it was an old lady who had 8 cats. The neighbor added some provocative details. One day, the old lady was gone, and the management simply turned her cats loose. The neighbor said no one knew for sure whether the old lady had died, only that she was gone abruptly. The cat that Tim and Louise had befriended was apparently the old woman's favorite and the only one that stuck around after she was gone. The couple's kindness to the animal and their calm acceptance of a rather spooky situation seemed to increase the strength of the moaning spirit. In addition to hearing the old woman, Louise could now occasionally see what she presumed was the deceased woman's image. She described the sight as something akin to a floating, dancing white rope. The haunting continued for a few months before weakening. The moaning was getting fainter. Louise recalled, by the time we moved to a bigger apartment in the same complex, all the activity had stopped. The little cottage-style apartment was no longer haunted. On to our second story in this episode. It is called The Presence. The early months of 1990 were exciting times for Jeff and Catherine Rollison Halbhuber. In January of that year, they moved into their first home in March. Alex, their first son, was born. Catherine described the starter home as a modest ranch-style house about 15 years old and added a particularly appealing description of its Seattle-Tacoma area location. I referred to it as a sub-rural neighborhood. It was developing, but there was still some farming around. Not long after our son was born, I began to notice that I was uncomfortable with the idea of spending time alone in the living room. Catherine remembered when she mentioned these unusual feelings to Jeff, he admitted that he had been feeling much the same way. And like his wife, Jeff Rollison Halbhuber, only felt uneasy in one room of the house, the living room. What was more disturbing was our son's reaction. He was the kind of baby who liked to be walked late at night. As he got older, he learned how to steer me where he wanted to go by pushing at me or leaning in the preferred direction. Catherine recalled, night after night, Alex would get me up and steer me down the hall to check out the living room. I would stop in every other room along the way, turning on lights and hoping he would be content with checking those. Despite her best efforts, the infant would insist on checking the living room. Catherine soon discovered that the baby didn't actually want to be in the living room. Once we'd peek in there, he would be content to return to his own room for rocking, nursing, and pacing. By now, both Catherine and Jeff were fully aware that they were sharing their new home with more than just one another and an infant son. They began to call the unseen and unheard entity by the only name that felt reasonable, the Presence. This went on for a few months, although it never got worse than our feeling uncomfortable and unwelcome in the living room, Catherine said. The sensation of being unwelcome in their own home, resented by something or someone they could only sense, but have been unpleasant, and Jeff and Catherine tried at first to expel the presence. We tried a couple of different solutions, Catherine remembered. The couple had not discussed their unusual housing situation with very many of their friends, But one of the few who did know about it gave Jeff and Catherine a quartz ball. It was a sphere. Catherine said it was small, maybe an inch in diameter, and was supposed to absorb the negative energy from the room. When the couple continued to sense the presence and feel unwelcome in the living room, Catherine tried another method of cleansing the area. I tried making a witch bottle with the same purpose in mind. This was actually something that I had read about in a book. It was just a small bottle, and I put scraps of thread in. There was a little chant that you said with it, which meant again to absorb the negative energy. Catherine's attempts to rid her house of the unwanted guest failed, but the people in the presence did eventually come to something like a truce. It was just sort of a gradual acceptance. It got to the point where I was quite comfortable sewing in the living room by myself up to 2 a.m., Catherine recalled. Even so, I was quick to leave the room after turning off the light. After 6 years, for reasons not connected to the entity, the family made the difficult decision to move. That, Catherine explained, was when things took a turn for the worse. We had gotten an offer from another family with small children, and the present seemed content with that, she said. But the offer went bad, and we ended up selling the house to a young unmarried man. We definitely got the feeling that the presence was not very happy about this. We think the entity had come to like the presence of children in the house. There was a return of the dark feelings from our earliest days in the house. Nothing physical, there never was, just a sense that everything was not right. Although a few of their friends were aware of the being that Jeff or Catherine called the presence, they discovered that they were not the only ones who were aware of it. Although we did not discuss the presence with many of our friends, just the one who gave us the quartz ball, to my knowledge. The subject came up at a gathering with friends soon after our house went on the market. We happened to mention that we thought the presence was unhappy with our decision to move. Since one of the people present was a person with whom I was sure we had not discussed our hunting, I turned to explain to her what I meant by the presence. The friend immediately piped up with, "You mean the one in your living room? Why do you think I never spent any time in there?" Whatever the being was that Catherine, Jeff, and Alex lived with for so long, it must have been associated with the house, not with the family. Catherine is convinced that the presence resided in the house long before she and her family got there, because it has not followed the threesome to their current dwelling. They presume that the presence has remained unseen, unheard, in the living room of their first home. Hopefully, you're enjoying these stories, and I look forward to presenting them to you in the weeks and months to come. So, until next time, take care and hope you enjoy this story of Ghost Stories from Washington, The Cats in the Cottage and the Presence. Until next time, be careful. You never know where one might show up. Be careful of ghosts in the closet.